Welcome back to The Haunted Beard, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. So over the last couple weeks, I've been watching a bunch of found footage horror films, getting ready to do a huge found footage tier list video. But amongst the ones that I've watched, I've discovered a few hidden gems amongst them, and just some ones that I think are lesser known, lesser talked about, but I would recommend, and I think you're worth your time. So this is just kind of a recommendation list video, and yeah, got a handful of them. Let's get into it. First up on the list is MOM, Mothers of Monsters. This came out in 2020. And it tells the story of this distraught mother who suspects her teenage son is plotting a school shooting. But when he slips through the cracks of the system, she is forced to take matters into her own hands. And in the last video I just released, I talked about We Need to Talk About Kevin, which is one of the most disturbing movies I've ever seen. And Mothers of Monsters gives me a bit of We Need to Talk About Kevin vibes, as this woman is really parenting a psychopath, a kid who is very, very unstable and has got some pretty sinister ideas in mind. This one kind of has a cool approach to it, as a lot of the found footage aspect of it is set up through surveillance and security cameras that the mom has set up in her house so that she can watch and spy on her son. And this is just a pretty dark and disturbing one. Obviously, that sort of domestic horror aspect of it, parents' worst nightmare kind of thing, and it kind of turns into this sort of battle between mother and son, cat and mouse type deal. And yeah, this one is pretty disturbing, obviously deals with some pretty dark subject matter, but I overall thought it was a pretty worthwhile experience and would recommend you check it out. Next up on my recommendations is Savageland. This came out in 2015, and this is a faux documentary or mockumentary, but also like a true crime mockumentary. When a small town near the Arizona-Mexico border is wiped out overnight, suspicion falls on the lone survivor. But a roll of photos the survivor took that night tells a different story. And this one I quite enjoyed. I'm just a huge true crime fan, so I liked the true crime aspect of it. The location is pretty cool, and just the story is very creepy and mysterious. And this one kind of weaves in some, I guess, more interesting themes where you're dealing with injustice, police corruption, immigration stuff, and sort of, you know, racial prejudices and stuff like that. So that kind of add a little bit of complexity, layers to the plot. But this one, like I said, I really like just the documentary, the true crime documentary approach to it. It tells a pretty interesting story. And Savageland has an interesting approach in that the found footage aspect is more like a found photo type approach, which is pretty cool, as this guy who gets arrested took all these photos of what transpired one night in this small border town, as all the residents of this little town get killed and completely wiped out overnight. And he's the only one who survives, and they suspect that he's this mass serial killer who killed everyone and went on this complete rampage. And he took like a handful, like 30 or 40 photos of the night in trying to document what exactly happened. And so you get to see some of the photos, and the photos are pretty interesting. They leave sort of a degree enough of mystery and kind of restraint. They're in black and white, not super explicit, but enough to where you kind of get an idea of what happened, but there's still an element of mystery to it. So this is a fun one. If you're like myself and you like true crime and found footage, definitely check out Savageland. Next up on the list is Mr. Jones. This came out in 2013. And this one is pretty interesting and pretty different. It tells a story of this couple who are in a relationship, and the guy drags his girlfriend to this sort of cabin in the woods just to get away, as he wants to pursue making a documentary. Although he doesn't really know what he wants to make the documentary about, drags his girlfriend along with him. They are having some relationship issues, and then this one takes a really unexpected turn. And I'll keep my thoughts vague on this one. I think this is a great one to go in knowing next to nothing about it. And this one has, just as I said, some really unexpected moments. It goes in some different directions, has some really just good creepy atmosphere to it. It gives me a little bit of Barbarian vibes, so if you're a fan of that movie, I think there's some elements of this that you'll enjoy. This one too is pretty ambitious, and not everything about it works. Some parts of it are a bit style over substance, but I still just really like the attempt, the going for it, the ambition of it. It gets a little wild and crazy. It's a pretty memorable sort of climactic, sequence and everything. So there's some pretty interesting directions this one goes in, and it's definitely different and stands out. But yeah, I would recommend Mr. Jones. Check it out. Next up is The Den. This also came out in 2013. And this one has the computer screen presentation. Not the first movie to do it, but one of the earlier ones. I really like this style of presentation if you can do it well. And I think for the most part, this one does it pretty well. This one tells the story of this woman who gets this grant to basically just chat with random strangers online to gather data for this sociological type of experiment. And so she just goes chatting online, and one day she happens upon something pretty sinister as she sees what seems to be this young girl get killed. This one has a nice mystery element to it. It also has sort of a voyeuristic aspect as you're, watching things through a webcam when you shouldn't be. And so there's just kind of that intriguing aspect to it that kind of pulls you right in. I think for the most part, they do a pretty effective job as to why we're watching and why things are recording. Sometimes they'll jump to like a cell phone or a video camera and things like that. So they do play a little loose with the rules here and there, but overall I think it works pretty well. There's obviously an element to it here about just the dangers of being online and chatting with strangers, and you never really know who you're talking to. And yeah, this one too has a really pretty brutal and messed up ending, but it is certainly memorable. And so yeah, The Den definitely sticks out. I think if you haven't seen it, it's well worth your time, so check it out. Next up is The Tunnel. This one came out in 2011, and this one I guess is probably not technically a hidden gem. It's a little bit more well-known, but I really enjoyed it, and it's not one of the most talked about found footage films, so I figured it's worth a mention because if you haven't seen it, I would obviously recommend you check it out. It's pretty good. This one starts with this woman who is an investigative journalist as she is investigating a story of a potential government cover-up involving the water supply and how they are going to reuse or recycle water. And so she gathers up a team around her, a camera crew, sound guy, stuff like that, and they go and investigate this story, which leads them to these underground tunnels. And I will say that The Tunnel has probably one of the very best just locations in any found footage horror movie I've seen. The location where they film this thing is just phenomenal. It's just a perfect atmosphere. It's creepy, it's dark, it's just awesome. This one too does a really good job in staying pretty true to the formula. I'm kind of picky sometimes in terms of like how much sort of post-production editing are added into found footage films. This one doesn't really add all that much music. I did notice at a few points they edited in like a little bit of a subtle heartbeat underneath just the natural sound, which I thought actually kind of was pretty effective. They give the people a good reason to continue filming because they are down in these tunnels and they just need the light, and so the light coming off of the camera is their only source to be able to see things and get around. So it makes sense why they're filming and why they have to continue filming. And this one just does a good job on not adding a bunch of extra stuff. They just rely on the performances and just the natural sort of diegetic sound to sell it, and just the creepy atmosphere of the location to sell it, and it sells it pretty effectively. This is a really solid one. If you like As Above, So Below and The Descent, which are two of my favorite horror movies, I think you will definitely like The Tunnel. Check it out. And the final one that I want to talk to you about, and I have saved the best for last, and that is Lunopolis. This is one that I've just recently heard about for the first time, and this is one I have never seen anybody recommend. But this thing is pretty great. This is more of a sci-fi mystery thriller than just an outright horror film, but man, this is a pretty solid one. This thing is extremely low budget, But man, just the ambition and the creativity and the ideas are what make this thing awesome. This one tells the story of two documentary filmmakers who accidentally uncovered the greatest moon secret the world has ever known, and the powerful organization determined to keep it that way. So these documentary filmmakers are these like paranormal investigators, and they work kind of with this radio show that talks all about these paranormal occurrences, and they will send these guys out to go and investigate. So this guy calls into this radio show, and he worked for some government organization, and he says that there are people living on the moon. And so these guys, investigators, go and investigate the story, and man, this thing gets wild. There's aspects of this that gave me a little bit of like an Indiana Jones vibe as they're, you know, breaking into things and looking for clues and symbols and, you know, going through dark underground tunnels and things like that. And this one has just ideas for days. If you like conspiracy theories and UFOs and government cover-ups, I mean, this thing, there are so many ideas and just craziness that they throw at the screen. But man, it's just a whole lot of fun. This one's cool too because in addition to the found footage element, there's also like a bit of a faux documentary edited into the middle of it as these guys uncover this massive conspiracy, which also involves like time travel and stuff like that. There's all sorts of just amazing, wild, crazy ideas. The creativity and the ambition for this is just off the charts. Given the extremely low budget, that's kind of part of the appeal too. And it's just amazing to see sort of the constraints that people are put in really kind of give birth to just creativity. And this thing is just creative. It has some really cool ideas. It's mysterious. It's just good sci-fi fun. And so this is one, like I said, I've hardly ever seen anybody recommend it. In fact, I've only seen one video on YouTube of a guy recommending it, and that's why I watched it. And I'm really glad I did. People need to check this out if you're a fan, especially of sci-fi, but just of found footage in general. Lunopolis, you can't go wrong. Check it out. So that concludes my list. Like I said, I'm working on a huge found footage tier list video that I'm going to be bringing you here pretty soon. But hit me up down in the comments below. Let me know some of your kind of more lesser known hidden gem found footage recommendations. Would love to hear from you. That's all I got for you. Like always, you know what to do. Hit that red button. It's all horror and thriller movie content here coming at you. And I'll see you next time on The Haunted Beard.